We are getting close. I know that we've got our speakers coming up. I've got a couple just things that we want to go over to make sure you understand the format for today and exactly what your role is as an audience. We're expecting to hear from two wonderful individuals, Dr. Dembski and Christopher Hitchens, and we're hoping that we'll get to hear both of their ideas presented and presented fully. And I know that some here may be more favored to one side or the other, and I know that you would love to clap and cheer and applause. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a little golf clap, where it's kind of that nice polite clap. This is not the Happy Gilmore golf audience. So we're going to try to refrain from that so that both speakers have an equal opportunity to present their message, because really that's why we invited these two individuals in. They're the two of the premier spokespersons on does God exist and is there a good God? And so we want to make sure that we have your full attention and we give your full attention to them. And so at the end of the debate, at the very end, when they give their closing remarks, we'll make sure that they feel welcome and they know that we appreciate them so much for giving up their time and their talents to come here and spend time with us. But during the debate, if you would with me, just refrain from having too much applause or any outburst, and that would be great. What we're going to do is we're going to start out with opening statements from each, with Mr. Hitchens starting. They'll have each 15 minutes to give an opening statement, which actually is a little bit shorter than what they're used to, but because we're a little bit younger audience than what they're used to. I was just talking to Mr. Hitchens before, and he said, this is a little younger audience than what I'm used to being in front of. He's used to being in front of colleges and adults. And I said, well, we're going all the way down to 7th grade, and so we wanted to make it a little bit short. And I've got ADD as well, so I want to make sure that we kind of keep these things nice and short so I can pay attention as we go. But we'll have 15-minute opening statements, we'll have 10-minute rebuttals, and then we'll have 5-minute rebuttal to the rebuttals. We'll have 30 minutes for question and answers, and I need to make sure we understand exactly what we're going to do for this. For the question and answers, there's actually going to be cards in your aisle, okay, little note cards. And I want you to be thinking during the first opening statements if there's any questions that you'd like to ask either Dr. Dembski or Mr. Hitchens. Okay? After they're done with their opening statements, we're going to pause for a second and we're going to start collecting those cards. And we're going to have some of our staff go through those cards and try to find some great questions, some questions that maybe there's a common theme. So we want to make sure that we ask this because there's a lot of people asking that question, or this is a really great question. We want to make sure we get that up. We'll have 30 minutes for Q&A, and what will happen is those cards will come up to me here at the front table, and I'll have an opportunity to just go through the cards and ask our speakers those questions. And after the 30 minutes of questions, which isn't going to be a lot of time for question and answer, but it'll be good. But after that, then they'll have 5 minutes apiece to finish up and give us their closing statements. When that's all said and done, right, it'll seem like the time will go tremendously fast. But when all that's said and done, that'll be about an hour and 45 minutes. And that'll be enough time, I think, to get out both of these particular views, both of these particular statements. And I think at the end of that, you'll walk away with some stuff to think about, some stuff to be challenged with, and some questions that you might have. And we hope that you take those questions and you search for the answer and you search for the truth. And that would be our great hope, is that you leave here saying, you know what, I need to go find the truth. What somebody said about a particular statement, I want to go see if that's true or not. The debate doesn't end here. This is where it starts. So go home. Prestonwood is a great church home. If you don't have one and you want to find a place that searches for the truth with you, using Scripture as our guide, this is a great place to come, and we'd invite you to join us here on the next Sunday that we have. And you're more than welcome to be here if you're not a member already. I want to set up the stage a little bit and let you just know who our two speakers are, who our debaters are, and we'll get them up here, and then you can have an opportunity to hear from them in their opening statements. A lot of you probably know Christopher Hitchens. He is one of the probably the most widely known, this as controversial writers and critics in the media. He's just a tremendous writer. He's a great wordsmith. He is fabulous with the pen and is a wonderful presenter with his voice as well. He's probably best known for his work here in Vanity Fair, as well as the Atlantic Monthly. He's a foreign correspondent and has written for more than 60 different countries. He's the only writer to have written since 2000 from Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. He's the author of many books. One of them, God is Not Great, How Religion Destroys Everything or Poisons Everything, is probably one of his most popular ones, and he's recently released his memoirs, Hitch 22. He was born in England. He's educated at both Cambridge and Oxford, holds honors degrees in philosophy, politics, and economics. He moved to the United States in 1981 and has worked as a book reviewer, a writer, a commentator, a critic, and a social intellect for many publications. When he comes up here, please give Christopher Hitchens a warm welcome. To debate Christopher Hitchens, we brought in Dr. Bill Dembski, who's a research professor in philosophy at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary right here in Fort Worth, Texas. He directs its Center for Cultural Engagement. He's a senior fellow with the Discovery Institute, their Institute for Science, for Center for Science and Culture in Seattle, and a senior research scientist with the Evolutionary Informatics Lab. He has doctorates in both mathematics and philosophy and has published articles in mathematics, engineering, philosophy, and theology, as well as authored and edited over 20 different books. In his book, The Design Inference, Eliminating Chance Through Small Possibilities, it was the first book on intelligent design published by a major university press, and he examined the design argument in a post-Darwinian context. In 2009, he published a book on God's goodness titled The End of Christianity, Finding a Good God in an Evil World. He lectures widely on intelligent design and has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including ABC's Nightline and Jon Stewart's The Daily Show. Now, before we bring him up, one other quick thing. I know we have media here. Obviously, we have our cameras running. One of the requests that we'll make to you is that we have no flash photography and that you don't actually videotape this yourself for your own personal use. We're being webcast live. If you need to see this after, it's actually going to be archived on our website at pcawebcast.com, and you can go and you can watch that at a later date. But for those of you who want to take flash photography, we'd ask you to refrain from that. There'll be plenty of pictures that are taken by the media, and you can see those later. So let's welcome our two guests, Christopher Hitchens and Dr. Bill Dembski.
Thank you for an extremely handsome, generous introduction, during which I began to feel like, as I surveyed the audience also, and having been listening to your music, a bit like a Daniel being introduced to a den of, I'm sure, very charming lion cubs. A different experience from my common one. Let's get straight to it because time presses. There are, I suppose, three forms of the divine, and if you eliminate polytheism, which I think we may as well all do for today's purposes, there are two ways of approaching it. One is the deistic, and one is the theistic. I hope I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but if you don't know it, it's useful, and it's a very important opening distinction. There are those, there have been those, among them were many of the founders of our great republic, in particular Mr. Thomas Jefferson, who were not Christians, but who were deists. They believed that the evidence of the universe and of nature showed a designer, seemed to imply it by its patterns and repetitions. A very, very common usage in those days was that of the watch, which later turns up in Mr. Paley's Natural Theology, which for many, many years was the central Christian text in the argument for design. He says very simply, if you're an Aborigine and you're walking along a beach and you find a pocket watch ticking away, you don't know what it's for. You have no education that would enable you to judge its purpose, but you can tell it's not a rock, and you can tell it's not a vegetable, and you can tell it's been made by someone for some purpose. That much you must know, even if you know nothing else. The metaphor of the watch was very much used by the deists. And of course, watches run down and break down. And it was believed by many of them that if an intelligence had begun the universe, begun the process, he took no further interest in it. Didn't intervene in human affairs, didn't mind who won the war, didn't mind which country was the leading one, watched with relative, well, or didn't watch with indifference, plague, famine, war, and so forth. That's a very hard position to oppose, by the way. It's very difficult, it's impossible actually to disprove. One can only say the evidence for it isn't quite strong enough to be persuasive. To be a theist, in other words, to occupy the position that many people here currently do, and my opponent does, to be a member of a monotheistic religion that believes that truth has been revealed, that God has intervened in human affairs, that he has a plan for us, each of us individually as well as a species, and that it shows, is a very, very much more difficult undertaking. I'm going to show why I think it's more or less impossible. There are usually three ways in which people try and demonstrate it. One is looking at the cosmos, the vault of heaven, the world beyond what we can quite see or apprehend. The second is human history and its development, and the third is ourselves, our own bodies, our makeup. Again, I'll have to condense, I hope you'll forgive me, but I'll sketch in what I think the objections are. Unless you don't believe, I don't know what they've been teaching you, unless you do not believe in the theory of what is conventionally called now the Big Bang, that our universe is billions of years old and began with a gigantic explosion, which is still going on, you are forced to be very, very, very modest about what it is you can know about anything. What preoccupies most scientists now is not how much they know compared to 50 years ago, though that is enormous as a difference, but how little they know compared to what they're finding out. So all these conclusions are very tentative, but minimally they must involve this. For a few milliseconds, really, of cosmic time, our species has lived on one very, very small rock in a very small solar system that's a part of a fantastically unimportant suburb in one of an uncountable number of galaxies. And that every second since the Big Bang, every single second, a star the size of our sun has blown up, gone to nothing, swelled up, shrunk into what's called a dwarf and disappeared. And that the matter of which we are made, cheer up, by the way, you are all made of stardust, which is a good way of thinking about yourself. But that's the price of that stardust. And every second I've been speaking, another of those suns has gone out. And indeed, physicists now exist who can tell you the date, more or less the exact one, on which our sun will follow suit. So the old Christian revivalists who used to stand on the street corner with signs saying, "Repent, the end of the world is at hand," were in their way right. We know when it's coming to an end, and we know how it will be. But and we know something even more extraordinary, which is that the rate of expansion of this explosion we're living through is actually speeding up. Our universe is flying apart further and faster than we thought it was. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it, and everyone who studies it professionally finds it impossible to reconcile this extraordinarily destructive, chaotic, self-destructive process, to find in it the finger of God, to find in that the idea of a design. And that's not just because we know so little about it. It's because what we know about it that's essential doesn't seem as if it's the intended result brought about by a divine, benign creator who loves every single one of us, living as we do on this tiny rock in this negligible suburb of the cosmos. So again, good luck if you want to, but if you're looking for God in the first instance, those are the difficulties you'll have to begin to encounter. If you want to take human history as a vindication, again, I'd urge great caution on you. And I'll take a non-Christian example, if I may, though I think in all cases it's a big mistake to think that your own cause or your own country or your own side has God in its corner. For one thing, it commits the sin of pride, which I know you've been warned against, what the Greeks call hubris. It is probably better, as Abraham Lincoln said, at a time when two sets of Christians were fighting over whether slavery was Christian or not, to decide the future of this union. Abraham Lincoln, who was also likewise not a Christian but a deist, if he was anything, said it might be more useful to find out if we are on God's side than whether he's on ours. But the temptation to enlist the cause of a good God is very strong. Indeed, there are many people in the world today, they're well known as jihadists, Muslim fundamentalists, people who want to kill, really do seriously want and intend to kill everyone in this room, who get the energy they've got and are willing to give their lives because they are so sure that God is with them. And if you want to believe that God intervenes on one side or another and that God takes a hand in human history and human affairs, you have to grant it to them too. I don't know whether you're ready to do that. Or you'd have to say, no, it's only true when we say so, which I think would be, wouldn't it, a rather unsatisfying argument. I'll take the case neither of the Christians nor the Jews but the Muslims. Excuse me, neither the Christians nor the Muslims but the Jews, who say they have a covenant with God, whose testament we Christians, we Western civilization, Christians include in the Holy Book. Those who claim to have met God, or whose leader met God face to face in the Sinai Peninsula, to have received the law, to have had a direct revelation of morality from him, to have a special covenant. Now, let me just say briefly what the problem with that has been for the Jewish religious leadership. About 10 years before I was born, about 50 to 60% of the Jewish people of Europe were put to death in disgusting ways by mass murder, gassing, immolation in Christian Europe in the middle of the 20th century. And many people wondered how God could permit this to a people who he had made a special relationship with. And many people left the synagogue as a result. They stopped going. The Jewish people are in their majority now post-religious, secular, very largely for this reason. And some rabbis were bold enough to say, no, there is a reason for this. You fell away from God and you forgot Israel, you forgot Jerusalem. It's a punishment for exile, it's a punishment for inattention to the covenant. Many people who'd seen their children burned alive said, I'm not listening to this, I'm leaving the religion. And many rabbis went quiet, thinking perhaps they shouldn't come up with any too instant explanation for such a fantastic human disaster and human crime. And they waited, and then the Israelis won a war in 1967 which got them back control of the holy places in Jerusalem. And then the rabbis blew the ram's horn again and said, no, we should have waited. Now we see the finger of God. It was all to drive us back to Palestine, where we should always have been, and to make us the owners of Jerusalem. Now we see what the design was. Well, I dare say you read the papers and watch the news. There isn't a single Israeli now who isn't wondering whether the victory in that war and the conquest of those holy places wasn't a disaster, hasn't led them into a terrible trap of endless war and confrontation in the Middle East, where their own hubris, their own occupation of other people's territory and holy places has led to a terrible impasse. There. Food, I hope, at any rate for thought. Probably the most I can do today is sow a little doubt and suggest a bit of reading. Then, our bodies. Well, again, I don't know what they've been telling you about Mr. Darwin and about where we come from and our kinship with other animal species, but I consider it a fairly settled question that our resemblance to other primates isn't exactly accidental. It's now possible to measure, in fact, in chromosomes. We are perhaps half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee, our nearest relative. All of you, when you were being born, when you were within your mother's womb, grew a coat of hair about 4 months in, and then shed it again. You don't need it anymore. All of you have an appendix that isn't needed any longer for the kind of digestion that you do. All of you have the same teeth. That's why you have to work on your wisdom teeth so much, and other things for the kind of diet other primates used to have to live on. All of you bear what Charles Darwin himself at the end of Origin of Species calls the unmistakable stamp of our lowly origin. You're a mammal, a primate. Take heart, primates can are capable of very great things, but we are adapted to an environment, the African savanna, which we abandoned. Why did we abandon it? Because if we didn't abandon it, we were going to go extinct. There was such a climate crisis in Africa all those thousands of years ago that the tiny tribe that was then us made the very smart decision to move north and out and away. It's reckoned by the National Geographic, I recommend you look this up, that the human species was down to less than 2,000 or 3,000 people at that point. And if it had not made this move, would have gone the way of, mark this figure, would have gone the way of 99.8%. 99.8% of all other species that have ever existed on this planet and gone extinct. Now, I just rubbed that in once more. 99.8% of all the forms of life ever to appear on this terrestrial globe are gone, wiped out. And it was nearly us. And this doesn't, to me, give the evidence of a design, of the finger of a god of any kind, let alone one who wishes us well. It rather suggests to me that nature and the world and human life are a struggle. You'll tell me when I've got, won't you, sir, a minute or two. Give me a wave. Thank you. I felt I was getting close to trespassing on Dr. Dembski's time. Now, it's really worth your time to write off to the National Geographic. They'll send you back a kit. You scrub the inside of your cheeks, put it in a solution, send it back. They will show you a map of where your ancestors came from in Africa and at what time and what route they took to get to where you are now. It will be very eye-opening. I strongly suggest you do it. While I have your attention, I also suggest on the matter of evolution that you read a book by Dr. Francis Collins called The Language of God. Dr. Collins, as you may know, ran the Human Genome Project, which analyzed our kinship with other animals, and we now know the whole extent of our genetic code and ID, including the messy gaps in it that are Dr. Dembski's speciality, and brought this in ahead of time and under budget, and is the greatest student of DNA and stem cells and all that go with it, who we have amongst us. I would say the greatest American living physician. I am prejudiced, he's a great friend of mine. He's also been a great help to me in my current illness. He's a great American. He's also a great Christian. That's why I recommend him to you. A very strong and believing Christian. And the chapters in his book, The Language of God, that tell you, don't waste your time not believing in evolution. Don't let anyone tell you it didn't take place. Nice, simple, clear, brilliant chapter. Is a chapter you are not educated if you have not read. I'll close and say, because I've got only a minute, why wouldn't I believe in this? Why might one not want to believe in it, even if it could be true? Because my view is that it's not only not true, but it's probably a good thing it isn't. Why is it not a good thing? Because I don't think it's healthy for people to want there to be a permanent, unalterable, irremovable authority over them. I don't like the idea of a father who never goes away. And nor do you if you think about it. When you get closer to parenthood, you won't say to your children, don't worry, I'll never die. You won't be at my funeral, I'll be at yours. I'll be at your grandchildren's funeral. You'll never hear the end of me. That's actually not loving paternity. The idea of a king who cannot be deposed, very un-American idea as well as a very undemocratic one. The idea of a judge who doesn't allow a lawyer or a jury or an appeal. This is an appeal to absolutism. It's the part of ourselves that's not so nice, that wants security, that wants certainty, that wants to be taken care of. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the human struggle for freedom was against the worst kind of dictatorship of all, the theocracy, the one that claims it has God on its side, the divine right of kings, the feudal system, the monarchical one against which the American Revolution, with its secular humanism, took place. I believe the totalitarian temptation has to be resisted, and I believe this is one of its core and origin points. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to consider emancipating yourself from the idea that you, selfishly, are the sole object of all the wonders of the cosmos and of nature, because that's not a humble idea at all. It's a very arrogant one, and there's no evidence for it. You do better to emancipate yourself from it and do some real study of genetics and biology and cosmology. And then, again, a second emancipation, to think of yourselves as free citizens who are not in thrall to any supernatural, eternal authority, which you will always find is interpreted for you by other mammals who claim to have access and to this authority that gives them special power over you. Don't allow yourselves to have your lives run like that. I've exhausted my time. I'm really grateful for your attention. I can't wait to be back. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchens. For both of our speakers, if this might be helpful to you, over my right shoulder in the back, there should be a countdown clock that you'll see counting down for you. I don't know if you can see that or not. I'll give you a couple minutes warning because I can see the clock here in front of me as well. So, Dr. Dembski.
Good morning. Thanks for this opportunity to be here. I'm grateful to Christopher Hitchens and to Prestonwood for giving me this opportunity. I want to address first the existence of God, and then in my next 10 minutes address the goodness of God. The existence of God is really the weightier question. Once that's settled, the goodness of God follows, I would say, straightforwardly. Although I could rehearse standard arguments for God's existence, I want in this debate to take a different tack. Christopher Hitchens disbelieves in God's existence. Why? Lack of evidence and evils perpetrated in the name of religion, he says. Yet his book, God is Not Great, reveals a more basic reason. Hitchens, as a scientific reductionist, believes science has given us new knowledge and that it destroys religious faith. What is this new knowledge? According to Hitchens, it is Darwinian evolution. You may ask what a chapter on evolution is doing in a book defending atheism. At the end of that chapter, Hitchens explains, quote, "We no longer have any need of a God to explain what is no longer mysterious." Let this sink in. Religion, according to Hitchens, renders biological origins mysterious. But now that Darwin has come and shown how natural selection explains biological origins, all is clear. Fellow atheist Richard Dawkins put it more memorably. Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. It's no coincidence that Richard Dawkins, the world's best-known atheist, is also an evolutionary biologist. Atheists, like everyone else, need a creation story. Without God in the picture, something like Darwinian evolution has to be true. And so Hitchens, though a humanities guy, lectures his readers on proofs of evolution. Let's look at a few of these proofs as he gives them. 1, junk DNA. If Darwin got it right, then our genes are cobbled together over a long evolutionary history, accumulating lots of useless DNA, junk, because it's easier for natural selection to keep copying junk than editing it out. This sounds plausible, but it is subject to experimental test. In fact, recent findings show that much of this so-called junk DNA regulates gene expression. This is true even of repetitive DNA, the quintessential DNA junk. A forthcoming book titled The Myth of Junk DNA details these findings. 2, the Cambrian explosion. This refers to a narrow slice of the fossil record in which the main animal body plans appear suddenly without any precursors. The Cambrian explosion was a mystery in Darwin's day, and it remains a mystery to this day. Paleontologist Peter Ward writes about the Cambrian explosion as follows, quote, "The seemingly sudden appearance of skeletonized life has been one of the most perplexing puzzles of the fossil record. How is it that animals as complex as trilobites and brachiopods could spring forth so suddenly, completely formed without a trace of their ancestors in the underlying strata? If ever there was evidence suggesting divine creation, surely the Precambrian and Cambrian transition, known from numerous locations across the face of the earth, is it." Now, Ward, like Hitchens, is an atheist, so he tries to soften this statement later, but the mystery remains. For more on the Cambrian explosion, see my book, The Design of Life. 3rd point, the inverted retina. Vertebrate eyes have nerve cells in front of the light-sensitive retinal cells. This means that light first has to pass through a barrier before being detected. This seems counterintuitive, but there are good functional reasons for it. A visual system needs 3 things: speed, resolution, and above all, sensitivity. If the eye isn't sensing light, it's useless. Now, it turns out that the light-sensitive cells are the most oxygen-greedy cells of all cells, and they get their oxygen from blood. The sensitivity here is truly astounding. Some frog eyes can sense the smallest unit of light, a single photon. Positioning the nerves in front of the light-sensitive retinal cells ensures maximal blood supply to the retina and thus maximal sensitivity. But the story gets better. In 2007, it was reported in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that Müller glial cells, these are the little cells, the fat cells that coat the nerves, act as optical fibers conveying light to the retina. As the abstract in the article notes, quote, their parallel array in the retina is reminiscent of fiber optic plates used for low distortion image transfer. Thus, Müller cells seem to mediate the image transfer through the vertebrate retina with minimal distortion and low loss. This finding elucidates a fundamental feature of the inverted retina as an optical system and ascribes a new function to the glial cells. So the vertebrate eye is much more sophisticated than Darwinists, on their low expectations of design, suspected. And thanks to these Müller glial cells, the eye's resolution is magnificent. This is completely unexpected. The problems with Hitchens' proofs of evolution don't end here. All his proofs are easily deconstructed. I'm happy to do so during the Q&A, and I have his book with me. Hitchens is obsessed with the human eye, the same eye that has allowed him to read and educate himself as an atheist. Observing different types of eyes in nature, he repeats the chestnut that natural selection gradually has turned a light-sensitive spot into a full-fledged camera eye. No mention that eyes have to be built in embryological development, or that eyes are only as good as their associated neural processing. No details about the genetic changes that would be needed to affect such a transformation. And it's not just that Hitchens doesn't provide that, nobody provides that when they tell these just-so stories about how the eye evolved. But to really make his case, Hitchens cites Dan Nilsson and Susan Pelger's mathematical model of eye evolution, which he claims shows that eyes could evolve in a geological instant. Let me tell you a secret about mathematical models and computer simulations. Unless you tether them to real observable processes, you can use them to prove anything, in which case they prove nothing. The model of Nilsson and Pelger, which Hitchens praises loudly, is of this sort. I can write a computer program that evolves Richard Nixon into Christopher Hitchens, the scary thought. Such simulations prove absolutely nothing. I know what you're all thinking. Since the evidence for evolution is so underwhelming, and since Hitchens has hitched his wagon to evolution, shouldn't he now be ready to abandon evolution and consider the existence of God? Yet this is precisely what he will not do. His atheism demands a materialistic form of evolution, and there's only one going theory of it, namely Darwinism. The alternative, which places us here as the result of design, is for him a non-starter. It's unthinkable. In regarding design as unthinkable, Hitchens puts himself in an atheist straitjacket. For the atheist, we must be here as the result of a blind, purposeless evolutionary process. There are no other options. Atheism demands evolution. Okay, it's not that evolution forces you to be an atheist, but if you are an atheist, that is your only option. For the theist, on the other hand, it's possible that God used an evolutionary process to deposit us here. But it's also possible that God deposited us here in ways that make our design evident. Either of these are live options for the theist, and the theist can consider them fairly. Atheism, however, cannot live without Darwin. Hitchens needs evolution to be true. His treatment of it is therefore calm and deferential, albeit mistaken. By contrast, his treatment of theology and biblical studies is boorish and obtuse. For instance, Hitchens dismisses Israel's time in Egypt and Sinai as myths lacking all archaeological evidence. Yet that evidence is readily available. Take, for instance, James Hoffmeier's books on the topic, published by that flaming fundamentalist publisher, Oxford University Press. Or consider Hitchens' view of Jesus. There is, according to him, quote, little or no evidence for the life of Jesus, close quote. Come again? It's one thing to deny the miracles attributed to Jesus, but to say, as Hitchens does, that Jesus is, quote, not a historical figure, close quote, is contrarian silliness. For all his talk about freedom of inquiry and Enlightenment rationality, Hitchens exhibits a very selective concern for truth. What seems to matter most to him is not whether a claim is true, but whether it makes a good stick to beat religion. Deny that Jesus was real? If it helps advance the atheist agenda, go for it, especially since it's easy to get away with this in an age of theological illiteracy. Whenever Hitchens invokes science against religion, one gets the impression that a juggernaut is rushing forward, crushing everything in its path. Science advances, religion retreats. This is wishful thinking. Fact is, as any historian of science understands, science is not a cumulative enterprise. So reversals, retractions, and revolutions play as much a role in science as insights, illuminations, and intellectual breakthroughs. Thus, new scientific advances, far from undercutting religion, can in fact overturn anti-theistic conclusions derived from prior scientific mistakes. Chemical evolution is a case in point. Chemical evolution attempts to describe how non-living chemicals arrange themselves into first life. Atheism requires that chemicals have this ability. Darwin attempted to strengthen the atheist's hand by arguing that first life was so simple it required no designer. Darwin's argument, made in a letter to Joseph Hooker, has since shown itself to be a failed argument from ignorance. Precisely because of what Darwin didn't know about the complexity of the cell, microscopy limited in the 1800s, he thought the cell was so simple that it could easily self-assemble from ordinary non-living matter. I point out to you that these arguments from ignorance charges apply both ways. I mean, it's possible to argue from ignorance for design, but it's possible also to argue from ignorance for non-design. The revolution in molecular biology of the last 50 years has given the lie to this misconception about chemical evolution. We now know that every cell, and all life is composed of cells, is a vastly complicated assembly of interconnected technologies that argue for intelligent design. We need to be engineers to understand what's inside the cell, and the level of engineering we find there far exceeds anything humans have invented. There's a whole field of engineering called biomimetics, where you look to the engineering that we find in living things and then use that to invent technologies for our use and pleasure. Now, if you want to see this, just the complexity of the cell, I urge you to get your PDA, call up YouTube, and punch in, quote, inner life of the cell. And my feelings won't be hurt if you do that right now while I drone on here. I just mentioned that what for Hitchens is a dirty word, intelligent design. For Hitchens, intelligent design, or ID as it's now abbreviated, is just rebranded creationism. It is religion and not science. But in fact, intelligent design covers a broad range of special sciences, including forensic science, archaeology, and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI. Intelligent design, by definition, is the study of patterns in nature that are best explained as the product of intelligence. Let me give that to you again. The study of patterns in nature that are best explained as the product of intelligence. It is a basic feature of human rationality to identify the products of intelligence and distinguish them from the products of natural forces. Okay, even our language draws that distinction. Was it the result of intention, purpose, design, intelligence? Was it the result of chance, accident, randomness, noise, necessity, chance, necessity? This is a fundamental way we have of making sense of the world. So, and many special sciences capitalize on this distinction. They would not be possible without it. In 1998, I published a statistical monograph with Cambridge University Press. It was titled The Design Inference, and Dan Panetti kindly mentioned that book. In it, I laid out a probabilistic method for drawing this distinction between design and accident. Essentially, this method triangulates on design by identifying independently given patterns, known as specifications, that are complex in the sense of being hard to reproduce by chance. And we see this in many, many different contexts. You may have seen the movie Contact, for instance, which came out the summer of 1997, but it was based on a novel by Carl Sagan, in which you have these SETI researchers, these extraterrestrial intelligence researchers. They're looking for signs of intelligence from outer space. And what convinces them that they've come across an intelligence from outer space? It's not that little green men come to Earth and then we can do experiments on them. It's just that we get these radio signals. What would tell us that a radio signal is the result of intelligence as opposed to the result of random radio noise? That's a scientific question, and it's one that intelligent design poses. In fact, it's at the center of intelligent design. So to dismiss it as rebranded creationism, I think really misses the point. Anyway, if you saw that movie, there's a moment at which contact is made, where the alien intelligences have made themselves evident, and it's when the radio astronomers find a long sequence of prime numbers These prime numbers are mathematically salient. They're specified, and they're also complex. It's a long sequence of prime numbers. It's not just, prime numbers are numbers divisible by themselves in ones, so it's not just 2, 3, end of story. If you're monitoring millions of radio channels, you'll find a very brief sequence of prime numbers. But a long sequence, well, that's not going to happen by chance. And this is we know this. Highly improbable events happen all the time, but if that event also matches a given pattern, a specification, then we know, we're dealing with design. All the mystery novels, all the cases of forensic science depend on this sort of drawing this inference. Did this person die by foul play? That would be design. Or did they die by natural causes? That would be non-design. Okay. So this method then identifies what I call specified complexity. In the design inference, I showed how this method applies outside biology. By the way, when I did this outside biology, I was in good shape. People were writing all sorts of nice things about my work. Once I applied it in biology, though, my career went down the toilet and I can no longer get a job in the mainstream academic world. And you can actually look at this. There are wonderful endorsements on the back of of my book, which have been pulled in the paperback edition. And in fact, one of the best endorsements by a philosopher of biology, Bill Wimsatt at University of Chicago, who was at my dissertation defense when I did that book, or did the dissertation because it was based on a philosophy dissertation. He is, in a subsequent blurb on the back of a book, he says, "This book completely deconstructs Dembski, who's trying to take science back to the Middle Ages." Okay, that's 10 years later. So actually, I think my work has gotten better over the years, but this is how it goes. Ideology infects this debate, and it's a religion, if you will. The same motions are at play which Christopher Hitchens inveighs against in the religious world, I find in the academic world. Maybe we can talk about that at some point. Anyway. I better get back to my prepared remarks here. In the design inference, I showed how this method applies outside biology. Subsequent work, I showed how it applies in biology. And we found that Darwinian evolution came up short and that ample evidence of design is found there. For a nice summary of this work, I would refer you to Stephen Meyer's book, Signature in the Cell, or my book, The Design of Life, which I think may be out there for sale. Just as getting from Darwinian evolution to atheism is not a big stretch, so getting from design and biology to theism is not a big stretch. Are we therefore ready to agree that God exists now? That we have seen Richard Hitchens' proofs of evolution fail, the intelligent design alternative succeed, and that his critiques of theology are self-serving? By itself, my argument establishes a designer behind the universe, a Kantian architect, if you will. For the purposes of this debate, however, I think we're pretty close to closing escrow. Note that the full positive case for God's existence can and should be fleshed out. Typically, such a case flows from critical reflection on the big questions of life. Why is there something rather than nothing? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why should we take morality seriously? Why is the world comprehensible to our minds? Why does mathematics, presumably a human invention, have such a precise purchase on physical reality? Each of these questions can, in my view, be answered better within a theistic than an atheistic worldview. And then there are the specific historical questions. Did Jesus really live at all? Which Christopher Hitchens seems to doubt. Did he resurrect from the dead? What is the evidence for that? If somebody raised from the dead, then it seems that there might be good evidence for the existence of a theistic deity. So all of those are questions we could raise, and I would raise them and address them if time permitted. But as I said, I'm taking a particular tack. Christopher Hitchens makes his case for atheism by looking to Darwinism. He needs that, and so I've focused on deconstructing that. And let me say this also. Intelligent design is a scientific program, but it has theological implications. That said, evolution, in the sense of a purely materialistic form of evolution, the type of evolution that Darwin came up with, also has implications. And I would say they are theological implications. They're anti-theological implications, but anti-theological implications are theological implications. When Stephen Jay Gould, for instance, who in his time was the best-known evolutionist this side of the Atlantic, remarked in his book, Ever Since Darwin, we know that we were not created in the image of a benevolent God. How does he know that? That's a theological claim. So intelligent design is friendly to theism in a way that evolution is not. And as I said, if you are an atheist, you must be an evolutionist. The implication runs from atheism to evolution. It does not run from evolution to atheism. It may be that God has just set up the world to evolve that way. That would be an option for a deity. But if you are an atheist, you must go with evolution, and a blind, purposeless form of it, one where you don't see any evidence of design. So that's where I'm going to leave the discussion about God's existence. I haven't argued for the full-blown deity, but I've gotten you at least into the ballpark of a deity. And so that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.